Big news. I'm excited to announce our first official sponsor of Who Runs This Park. Who Runs This Park is presented by Expert Voice. Gear up for adventure with Expert Voice, the outdoor gear source for industry experts. Outdoor brands like Big Agnes, Mammoth, La Sportiva, Chaco, and more offer discounts on Expert Voice of up to 60% off for industry experts like you. And you can join Expert Voice for free today and see what brands you qualify for. So, whatever the next adventure calls for, make sure you're prepared with expertvoice.com/parks and gear up for adventure. Thanks again to Expert Voice for sponsoring Who Runs This Park. If you like chocolate, which honestly might be a red flag if you don't, you have to try out Ritual Chocolate. Ritual Chocolate is my favorite chocolate brand by far, and I learned about them from spending a lot of time in Park City, Utah, where they're based nearby, and actually got to take my family to a chocolate tasting at their factory. And it changed the way we all think about and eat small batch chocolate. While I already had loved the bars, it opened up my world to the variety and depth of flavor profiles chocolate can have. I'm so excited to be sharing this with you all. Who Runs This Park listeners get 10% off their online purchases of Ritual Chocolate. Go to ritualchocolate.com, that's RITUAL chocolate.com, and use promo code WRTP for 10% off. You'll be thanking me later for this, I promise. And did I mention I'm obsessed with their packaging? It's so beautiful, so even just having the bars and opening them up is a treat. Get on it and order some chocolate. Okay, let's get back to the show. Welcome to Who Runs This Park, a podcast presented by Expert Voice, where you are invited into the hearts and stories of those who have committed their careers to the protection and preservation of our great national parks. Who Runs This Park aims to be a catalyst for inspiration, highlighting all that goes into managing our national parks and building a sense of appreciation for the invaluable beauty, diversity, and history of our protected lands. Today we have Lisa Petit with us, Cuyahoga Valley National Park Superintendent. Cuyahoga Valley National Park is nestled between Cleveland and Akron in the state of Ohio and is a breathtaking expanse of natural beauty, rich history, and vibrant wildlife, and is unique in its proximity and relationships with surrounding communities and its drastic transformation from a place where the river historically caught on fire to a river rich in ecology and opportunities for humans to recreate. Lisa has been superintendent at Cuyahoga Valley since 2021, but has been working there for almost 25 years, previously serving in a variety of leadership positions and working as a wildlife biologist. Before coming to Cuyahoga Valley, Lisa was a research biologist with the Smithsonian Institution in DC. How cool. And Lisa's commitment to the growth and flourishment of Cuyahoga Valley is evident, and I'm beyond excited to tap into her extensive knowledge and care for this park. Lisa, welcome to Who Runs This Park. It's a joy to have you today.
Thanks, Maddie. It's wonderful to be here with you.
A way I like to start off the conversations is typically understanding some unique or crazy situations that you've had at the current park. So I'd love to hear what comes to mind when you think of the craziest situation you've dealt with at Cuyahoga Valley National Park as superintendent.
There were so many things that came to my mind and what I ended up with and thinking through, what some of the most interesting and maybe challenging is what I ended up with. The most challenging sort of decision making that I've had to do since becoming superintendent. There's been a whole lot going on in the 25 years I've been here, but as superintendent,
Yes.
one of the most challenging, risky decision-making efforts that I had was fairly recently with keeping our scenic train running safely in spite of serious erosion that was happening that was threatening the tracks and the safety of running the train. So it was an incredibly stressful situation for all of the staff and for our nonprofit partner who runs the train for us, with us. And we worked together. There was a lot of conflict because people, we had this public safety at the heart of this, and
Right.
also the fiscal sustainability, the financial sustainability and the survival really of this nonprofit that had to run in order and have passengers in order to survive into the future. And we were talking about probably a year's worth of work to fix all the erosion. So this happened, luckily, it was sort of happening most in the northern part. We have 26 miles of track. And so it was happening mostly in the northern portion of the track. So we had to decide how to get the train, this very heavy train, down to the southern half of the park. And it would have to cross areas that were, eroding and where the tracks were not necessarily very safe. So, but we worked very hard with engineers, with consultants, developed an internal plan. I mean, it was down to the tiniest detail of how we were going to move this empty train down to a place where they could then set up again and run, and we were successful. So they actually were able to do that. They got down into the southern portion. So they essentially run on the southern half of the tracks, and
Okay.
that gave us the ability to keep them solvent, keep our visitors happy, and also
Mhm.
fix the erosion. And we're coming up on the end of that. We should be finishing that work to repair the erosion in multiple sites before the end of the calendar year, and they should be able to run the
Okay.
full length within the next 4 or 5 months. So it's working. It worked out, but at that point, I don't know. I think it was touch and go. So
Yeah.
it was a
Oh
big
my
risk,
gosh.
but we were successful.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was, like you said, several different consultative teams and
Hmm.
engineers to, at various points, each like pain point along the northern part of the trail, or not trail, I guess, the railroads that
Hmm.
were maybe not up to the standards that would make it safe for passengers or something.
Right, right. And so, yeah,
Um,
this is high stakes. And
yes.
I was
Yeah.
proud of our team for, really pitching in and thinking this is the park staff, this partner staff, this is external consultants, everyone working to make sure that we did the right thing and were able to optimize the outcome and get to the right outcome.
And can you tell me actually a little bit more about the scenic railroad? Because I know my understanding is that it's pretty
It
unique
is,
to the
yeah.
National Park Service.
Yeah, very unique, especially because of the amount of track that the park owns, and also so the length of the whole railroad, and also the nature of our partnership. So what we have is in the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad is itself an independent, 501(c)(3) nonprofit partner
Okay.
who is a cooperator with us. They're kind of a operating partner in a sense because they own and operate all of the trains and all of the cars, and then they provide all the service to the visitors. And we
Okay.
own and maintain that 26 miles I talked about, 26 miles of track, which in itself is a huge lift for us to.
Yeah.
It's
I
very
mean, it's a
expensive.
marathon length of
It is.
track.
It is. And yet it is, as you say, it's one of the most unique things about this location. They've been around longer than the park has been around, by about 2 years. So they
Wow.
were established, or they
Okay.
became an organization in 1972, and
Okay.
then as CVSR, the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad. And then we became designated as a park in 1974. So, and to tell you the truth, they became sort of a very popular independent entity,
Mhm.
even more than the national park, or faster than the national park. So people
Mhm.
knew about the scenic railroad before they realized they were even in a national park. So, we've had that partnership for almost that long, and it's just been fantastic, and the public truly loves it. It is a unique way to see a national park. It's a very
Right.
different experience. And it's also, they operate as our alternative transportation system. So they move people into the
Yeah.
park without their cars. That helps us on many fronts.
Wow, that's nice.
Yeah, and then people can experience the park from the train. They can also get off. They can bring their bike aboard. They can bring their kayak aboard,
Wow, that's
and they can
cool.
move one way on a train, get onto the trail, go back to their car, or vice versa. Get onto the water,
Right.
onto the river, and be shuttled back and forth by the train. And that's a hugely
Okay.
popular amenity.
Are there multiple stops, or is it kind of
Yeah.
a one way?
No, there are multiple stops, and at about 8, I think, 8 stations within the boundary of the park, and the public can, wave down at any one of those stops. The public can wave down the train as it
Really?
pulls in and put their bike aboard or their kayak aboard.
Wow.
Go one way, put in,
And And with the train, is it only a 26-mile duration, or does the railroad go farther than that outside of the bounds of the park?
That's the duration right now. That's
Okay.
the total ownership by the park. So 26 miles, it goes from the city of Akron up
Okay.
north to the city of Independence. We stop
Okay.
short of the city of Cleveland. There are tracks north and south, but we don't run on those. We used to run south to Canton,
Okay.
but that was through an agreement with a different transportation, the owners of the tracks down south. So that
Okay.
we don't have that agreement anymore, so we don't run to Canton. But it's still
Okay.
possible for the future.
Yeah.
Also, very excited that we see the scenic railroad as being one of those key ways that we're going to be able to fulfill our mission as a park to the people. That is the
Mm,
tagline that we were kind of given when we were established, because it was during a time when the National Park Service wanted to bring national parks into higher population centers, cities.
mm,
So we were established as a national park unit, originally a national recreation area, at the same time
mhm,
that Gateway National Recreation Area was established in New York, and
mm,
Golden Gate National Recreation Area
mm.
was established in San Francisco. So
Okay.
as we were one of the of several parks like those that were established in cities, and as I mentioned, our boundary stopped short of the city of Cleveland,
Right.
and we can connect to them by rail. We do connect to them.
Mhm.
The river connects us, the
Yeah.
Ohio and Erie Canal and the Towpath Trail, which we can get into in a
Mm,
little bit, connects us to the city of Cleveland and to Lake Erie, both of those.
mhm.
And now we hope, maybe in the near future, we're studying it right now, can we get connection by rail? If we can, and we think we can, that will be a game changer. We'll be able to get folks from inner city Cleveland into the park,
Mm,
populations who have not had access to this national park. As close as we are, they are unable to reach us. This would grant them
mhm.
access, immediate
That'd be
access to
awesome.
this magnificent green space in this region. Not to mention connecting other Clevelanders and connecting visitors to Cleveland
Yeah.
directly to the national park. So that is, we really do value our partnership with CVSR in the park, and now hopefully connecting to the broader region even more directly.
Right. A quick tangent is my mom is from Bay Village, which is, outside of Cleveland, sort of. I guess I
Mhm,
don't know if it's like a
it
suburb
is.
or not. But so she was youngest of 9 kids. So there's a lot of people in our family still in the Cleveland area and mainly Bay Village and Rocky River. But I've actually never been to Cuyahoga Valley. I think we drive through part of it coming from the airport to get to Rocky River, but it's as I've pursued this project of interviewing superintendents of national parks. Of course, now I'm like, when we go to Cleveland to visit family, it's top of the list to check it out. And so it's really cool to hear that there are plans to connect more of Cleveland to the park and make it connect to Lake Erie, which like Bay Village and Rocky River are right on Lake Erie. So that's very much so in my realm of knowledge of the Cleveland, Akron, Ohio area.
Well, but that's great, and, it's interesting because so many people who are from this area are coming back to this area. We find a lot of our
Hmm.
employees are returning to where they grew up, and,
Mm,
I think this part of Ohio especially, just, I think people have nostalgia for it and they come back, and
hmm.
that's we're so excited about that. The places you're talking about are the Cleveland Metro Parks, and we join with Cleveland Metro Parks in geography. You
Mm,
may remember, or your mom may remember, that the Cleveland Metro Parks are called the Emerald Necklace. They're a lot older than we are because they were established over
mm.
100 years ago with the
Oh, wow.
foresight that city planners had in Cleveland to establish green space. So it's phenomenal. So we call ourselves the pendant hanging from the
Mm.
emerald necklace.
Oh, that's so cool.
So
I like that.
so we are at that southern border of the emerald necklace. So but we are in both
Okay.
Cuyahoga County and Summit County. So we serve both Cleveland and Akron.
Yeah, that's something and we've touched on this a little bit already, but when researching more about Cuyahoga Valley, what kept coming up was just this uniqueness in terms of the different relationships it has with communities and municipalities. And I think even like ski resorts and the scenic railroad and all these different things. So, can you talk a little bit about, or a little bit more about that unique interplay with all the different, I don't even know what they're like, communities, I
Mhm.
guess?
Absolutely. We are, that is one of the unique things about us is how integrated we are with our communities as a national park.
Hmm.
We have 15 different independent municipalities that intersect or are within, are coming in contact with our boundary. We
Hmm.
have 2 counties. And we also, you alluded to ski areas. We have numerous inholdings. Both the Cleveland Metro Parks and the Summit Metro Parks have land
Hmm.
within the boundary. The legislative boundary of the national park incorporates all of these
Oh,
different
interesting.
landowners. And they are independent landowners in the sense that they are within the national park, but only we have no jurisdiction over their lands. We have about
Mm,
in 33,000 acres, which is about 50 square miles. 33,000
okay.
acres we own as a federal entity. The Federal Park Service owns only about 20,000 of those acres. So about two
Okay.
thirds of the acreage within the boundary. So it's a big mosaic of land
Hmm.
ownership. And, that plays into our DNA as a collaborative, community centered national park. I
Hmm.
park to the people. So we really are living that in many respects. Now, that was not overly popular at the time that we were
Interesting.
established because
Interesting.
it was a park over the people, on top of the people. It was,
Right.
Congress is a great idea from the perspective of, there was grassroots support for it for sure.
Right.
And that's what really created us, that the grassroots community support.
Right.
Congress drew the legislative boundary, and of course, there's always negotiations when that happens for a national park. And there were many municipalities, well, 2 in particular, the Village of
Hmm.
Peninsula, that really were very offended by this action to come in as the federal
Mm,
government, take land. Essentially, it was the way they felt. And so they
hmm.
carved themselves out of the boundary. In other words, we have no say over their land in
Okay.
some portions. And then there are plenty of people who kept their private land. So anyway, it's a real mishmash and a mosaic. And it was not a very happy time when we were first created. It was a grand
In
vision
the 70s,
in the
right? When we're
70s,
talking about.
yes.
Okay.
So it was a very painful start for
Mm,
everyone involved. And as we come on to our 50th year, though, we're feeling like this is really, I don't know exactly when the turning point was, but most, we are just incredibly supported by our public
hmm.
and by our communities.
Hmm.
And we are supported morally, we are supported financially, we are supported with time. We have one of the largest volunteer groups in the
Mm,
country because people are just truly have a stake in this place. This is their
hmm.
place and they help us so much. So I feel like we have benefited so much from all that integration with all these communities, which at first time, we kind of looked at it, and I've been here a while. So when I first got here, it was looked at kind of like a weakness, well, you don't own
Hmm.
all the land in your boundary. Well, these folks don't want they don't want anything to do with you. They don't want you telling them what to do,
Right.
all those things that I feel the boundaries have been blurred, the collaboration is evident, and the support from the communities is really high. So I think we
Yeah, that's
are
really awesome.
really becoming what we hoped and what the people who started us, what they hoped we would be.
Yeah, well, it's cool when you're able to live up to what you envision. And they actually, this is unrelated, but it makes me think of it. Of For the podcast, I've been creating different promotional videos and different content on Instagram and TikTok and all those things. And they talk about in this content creation space, like there's a really painful period where your skills in creating do not match the vision that you have. And it's really rewarding when you're like finally able to produce something that has the vision that you wanted for it. When there's that vision gap, it's painful, but you have to push through it. And so it's cool that you're feeling, I'm thinking it's a similar thing. I think that maybe the park is feeling of, it's like you're at that turning point, or you have been for a while, where you're reaping some of the benefits of, after some painful conversations and stuff like that, that you are arriving at a place or have arrived at a place where you're living out the vision of why Cuyahoga Valley was set aside in the first place. So that's really cool that you get to be managing it in that transition period.
I love that. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The creative gap, and I think it has been creating, a place, creating a
Yeah.
value, creating a feeling, creating an experience. So thanks.
Well, I think even in terms of creating experiences, my understanding is that the way people are interacting with the Cuyahoga River is changing and transforming and being created in a sense. Can you talk a little bit about that transformation and give folks context of a river that was heavily impacted by industry and then now is the transformation it's had over these X amount of years?
I love to because that story of the Cuyahoga River is the same story of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park and the Cuyahoga Valley, obviously. Yeah, I find it one of the, not just because I'm here, I find it one of the most inspiring environmental comeback stories. It's such a rich story of people and activism and also the resilience of nature and the appreciation of
Mhm.
nature by people. So it's, it began the river caught on fire many times because of the industrial waste and the oil and other waste that was on the surface in the city, mostly in the city of Cleveland. So not
Mhm.
necessarily here in the valley, but it caught on fire many, many times. And the final time that it caught on fire was in 1969. And that was at a time where I believe he was the first Black mayor of any city, but he was definitely Mayor Carl Stokes of Cleveland, drew attention to the plight of industrial cities and water quality, air quality, pollution,
Mm.
essentially, and the impact that it
Mhm.
had on urban Blacks, essentially,
Mm.
inner city people, impoverished people. And so it was a story of environmental justice that he was raising, and it was published in Time magazine and got a
Whoa,
huge
cool.
amount of public attention. Now, unfortunately, Carl Stokes was trying to point to the inner city urban communities' plight. What it did do is talk about urban rivers and urban environmental quality overall. And so it
Mhm.
spurred on, it was a catalyst, one of the major catalysts for the passage of the Clean Water Act, the establishment of the
Wow.
EPA, the Clean Air Act.
Wow.
All of that legislation really it was on display. The terrible conditions were on display in that Time magazine article, and all of the attention on Cleveland and the Cuyahoga River. So it earned the name the Burning River, and there were songs about it, and
Right,
all these
right.
things. So that really spurred this strong environmental movement, and
Mhm.
all because of this little river called the Cuyahoga River. The
Wow.
park was established then in 1974. Congressman John Seiberling was at the sort of the founding father in many respects. He was obviously from the Seiberling, the Firestone. I'm sorry, the Goodrich Tire Company is
Oh,
eventually
interesting.
it came from the Cyberlings. So they were the tire magnates in the industrial era. And so John Cyberling was very interested in preserving the valley where his family home is, Stan Hewitt,
Mm.
and very, very motivated to create a national park here. But it was all in that environmental movement kind of sense to preserve the valley from the sprawl that was coming out and protect it. The establishment of the park itself, I will continually state that because of the restoration of this amount of green space along 26 miles
Mhm.
of the Cuyahoga River, we have, by our very existence, contributed to the comeback. The environmental health of
Mm.
this river is helped by the
Mhm.
native vegetation, by the forest recovery, by the wetland recoveries of the existence of this national park. So we certainly
Mhm.
contributed to the overall health and the comeback.
Yeah, that's cool. And what ways are people or I guess what is the opportunity to expand the recreational use of the river? Where does the national park also play a part in that?
Well, we are a part of a whole regional effort that has established a state
Mhm.
designated water trail along the Cuyahoga, going all the way from the headwaters in Geauga County to Lake Erie. And so we've joined
Okay.
with 12 or so other, maybe 20 other entities, 12 other land owning entities, parks
Mhm.
essentially, and others to protect and, administer this water trail. So we put in
Mhm.
the access points and things like that, and then we manage.
Mhm.
So we have one of the, we have about a quarter of the entire river is within our boundary. So we have a significant role in managing the water trail amenities.
Mhm.
And so we're developing that. And it's even from designation of, which was in 2019 in honor of the 50th anniversary of the last burning of the river, is when we
Mm.
actually dedicated the water trail
Mhm.
as a whole consortium in the region. Even since that time, 2019, we've seen just an incredible spike in the number of people who are paddling the river. They're coming
That's
from
cool.
all over. They're right now bringing their own equipment, their own kayaks, and the train actually figures into that with shuttling and that sort of thing. So I remember
Right.
in like one summer in a year's time, we went from the train transporting about maybe 100 kayaks in the kayak aboard to, in one year, to the next summer they were taking 1,000. So it's really
Wow.
just mushroomed, and we do get quite a healthy paddling community on that river. We've removed a dam, a couple of dams. People are really excited. It's a decent river to paddle, especially through the
Mhm.
park. It's not too difficult, but it's not too easy
Mhm.
either, so it gives a little bit of a challenge, and we
Yeah.
do definitely have a growing, thriving paddling community.
And can you camp alongside the river, or is that something you envision?
We envision some of that, yes. There are places where you can camp on privately owned areas, and I think Summit
Okay.
Metro Parks has a couple spots. But right now in the national park, we don't have riverside camping yet. That's something
Okay.
we are exploring and may develop in the future.
Cool. And does paddling refer to canoeing or kayaking
Both.
or both?
It's both.
Okay. So whatever mode of transportation people are wanting
Yes.
to paddle the river, they can bring.
Yes, except we are discouraging. In fact, we don't allow tubes, inner
Oh,
tubes, that
interesting.
kind of thing. People would some folks would like that. It's not conducive to the section within the park. And so we don't allow tubes. And we don't allow
Is
any
what do you
alcohol, which is
mm,
also a deterrent sometimes to folks, but
yeah.
that's the way it's going to be. We're going to try it. What we're trying to do is maintain what we're defining as a national park experience, which should be
Right.
very remote. We try to preserve that sense of being far away from the developed world.
Mm,
And to the extent we can, it's actually a very nice travel through the park. It's a very nice way to
mhm.
experience the park. A lot of wildlife, a lot of tranquility, and so we want to keep it that way.
Yeah, adding the alcohol piece adds hypes up the ruckus a little bit.
It
Um,
does.
because I'm thinking you can float the river in Texas. I'm based in Austin and in this area called San Marcos, and I think it's a little bit of a party scene. So I can see there's different times and places for different things, and like you said, preserving that remote nature experience. And like who for what park was it? They were talking about the sounds. Oh, it was Zion. I was talking to the Zion superintendent, and they really are concerned about the soundscape. So
Yes.
it's like this idea of landscape, but what's the soundscape? And, by preserving the natural aspects of the park, you're preserving that soundscape of the wilderness.
Absolutely. And that is true for us. We have a decent natural soundscape for the
Hmm.
place where we are, surrounded by so many people. You can have that tranquil, quiet, natural sounds kind of experience on the river especially.
Yeah. Before we dive into more Cuyahoga Valley National Park questions, I want to take a step back and get a bit more context into your experience and kind of what led you to where you are and what your experience and how it shapes how you currently lead Cuyahoga Valley. So I know I mentioned in the intro that you were previously a wildlife biologist and then worked as a research biologist with the Smithsonian. Before all of that, my understanding is that you studied zoology And my guess is that got you into the biologist realm. Can you share what led you to study that? And then also, I read that Jane Goodall had a big impact on your career path. So I'd love to understand how that maybe influenced your decision to study zoology.
Yes. So zoology itself is just the study of animals. And I was led to that. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, really, I was drawn to animals of almost any kind, So we had pets and I lived
Yeah,
in the suburbs. So, any animal at all was very cool to me.
right.
We did travel as a family to other countries. And so, I had the opportunity to see in South America, other sort of exotic wildlife and that sort of thing. But
Mm,
nonetheless, no matter what, farm animals, pets, it didn't matter. I just wanted to be around them. And I
yeah.
was introverted. So I was really happy to be completely on my own somewhere. It drove my parents crazy because, it's like I had no trouble being out in the middle of, nowhere or down at
Right.
the creek by myself with no one around. I never felt lonely because I was always just so intrigued by whatever life was, or, natural life was around me.
Yeah,
So that was what really I started clubs when I was tiny. I started clubs where we would just learn about animals, and watch
that's
them.
yeah, that's awesome.
and, and so then I
Oh.
see then I see on TV this woman who is her whole research is based upon understanding what chimpanzees, how they live, how they behave, how they interact with each other. And she kind of cracks the code where she can communicate with them herself and she's accepted into their society. And I
Wow.
thought, that's me. That's me. That's what I want to do.
Yeah,
And so I
yeah.
just thought, wow, I mean, she made a whole career out of this and she's famous because she went and it did what I was doing every single day of looking at whatever. It was squirrel,
Right.
or a robin. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
So anyway, I learned, oh, I could maybe make a career out of this. Well, what does it take? Well, she has a PhD. Okay, I got to go get a PhD.
They were
I
like,
got to go to
"Easy,
college.
PhD, done."
Yeah, I got to go to college and let's learn about animal behavior. Okay, so and I just started on that. I thought that I was going to maybe also study chimpanzees or apes, or I would study, I fell in love with wolves or coyotes because of David
Mm,
Meach or Farley Mowat. These were authors and researchers
mm.
who I had read. And then when I got to school, I went to Ohio State University, and I was from the DC area as a kid.
Oh, okay.
So I went to Ohio State because they had an animal behavior, major. This is back way
Right.
before people started, really vetting all the colleges they could go to. And I met researchers who actually were making their careers out of studying birds. So that's what turned me on
Cool.
to birds and migratory birds, conservation biology, animal behavior. I went to England and studied with a famous animal behaviorist in England during my PhD. And my husband was an a bird behavior biologist. So
Mm,
when I met him. So, it just seemed to be written. So that's how I
yeah.
got into studying animals and studying birds in particular, which is what took me to the
Yeah.
Smithsonian.
I can't remember if it was an interview or an article that I read, but it was you talking about thinking about migratory birds and their perspective and how it's so different than like a lion or a tiger or something like that,
Hmm.
because it's always this, like they say, a bird's eye view.
Hmm.
And that really stuck with me because I just had never thought about that. Of you were thinking about what is the view that they're seeing on their migration.
Hmm.
And yeah, I just thought it was really a unique perspective. Can you share what work you specifically did at the Smithsonian?
Yes, and I was so that bird's eye view. I started my career at a time, as I say, when conservation biology was becoming a thing. That was a field
Mm,
that a lot of people were going into. It was at a time where the Amazon rainforests were a big idea, the big source of concern and the loss of the Amazon rainforests and migratory birds that pass amongst, through the hemisphere from the US down into Latin America, Central and South America
mhm.
are like were thought of, a lot of them were showing declines, and it was thought that it's
Mm,
because of the deforestation that this is happening. It's the forest birds that are having the greatest problem. So, what was it along their path between these countries was affecting them? And it all comes down to that bird's eye view. Where can they
yeah.
land? You know, what
Mhm.
is hospitable down there as they're passing over? They're looking down, seeing, okay, you got some sort of criteria they're looking at. What is it that's going to attract them to come back down and either gain energy for the rest of their trip or spend the winter there or spend their time
Mhm.
nesting? So I
Mm.
worked in multiple places along the migration route. I worked in many places in Ohio, Virginia, Washington, D.C. area, as well as down in Belize and Panama. And I looked at all different kinds of types of land use, human land
Okay.
use. So whether I've spent a lot of time in protected areas like parks, because oftentimes those are the big areas of forest that have been preserved.
Yeah.
But I also looked
Yeah.
at and I compared that to cattle ranches and sugarcane
Mhm.
groves and residential areas, which have a lot of big old trees, or coffee plantations. I spent a lot of
Oh,
time
interesting.
looking at different ways of coffee plantation. And the interesting
Mm.
thing was, and it's becoming a thing more now that we're paying attention. Some of it comes from Latin America and conservation biology, but the indigenous way of growing crops is much more conducive to conservation of all
Mm.
species because they interplant, because they're sensitive. These methods that are time tested and throughout cultures
Mhm.
often are least invasive to the existing natural habitat and work within it, work within the
Yeah.
natural system to for food and sustenance, building their homes, as well as supporting the wildlife. So
Yeah.
we looked at that in terms of different ways of cultivating land.
Yeah. Oh man, it's so humbling and I think I'm seeing that a lot across a lot of the national park conversations I'm having and I think there's a bigger emphasis to be a lot more collaborative with surrounding communities of different national parks and I think it was Lake Clark. I was talking to the Lake Clark National Park and Preserve up in Alaska superintendent and she was talking about studying salmon and how they asked some of the indigenous communities in the surrounding area about like how they should approach the study and just that knowledge, I mean, is you can't even put like a value to it. It's so or it's hard to even pinpoint the value. It's so valuable
Mhm,
to have that
mhm,
knowledge and
mhm.
it's I think really beautiful to be I think acknowledging maybe that the way we did things in the past was not great and really trying to make efforts to have those better relationships and then there are all these like you said benefits of seeing like wow the way that even the coffee plantations were are better for migratory birds. Like that to me is so cool that it's just better for the environment and more sustainable. And yeah, so it's cool to learn more examples of that.
Yeah, I really do think so. And I mean, I said that it possibly came through conservation that was happening in other countries. That may or may not be true. You're pointing out Alaska. I mean, obviously, we've had a lot of indigenous attention on indigenous methodology and
Hmm.
subsistence hunting and that sort of thing, use
Hmm.
of public lands. But I do think that it is time, it's overdue. And I do
Yes.
like that we are changing and acknowledging and saying, well, maybe we just didn't do it quite right. The European way of coming in, and literally clear
Yeah.
cutting, plowing everything under. And we see that where that's done in places like Latin America, it's just really devastating. It's devastating because it's
Hmm.
inappropriate for the place where they're trying to do it. So anyway,
Hmm.
I could go on, and I probably shouldn't. But,
Yeah.
yeah, I am so grateful that we are starting to see,
Yeah.
and move toward change.
Yeah. I'd love to hear how you transitioned to Cuyahoga Valley National Park. What led you to take that job and switch from the Smithsonian?
It was all about family. um,
Mm,
and we had actually, my husband and I were research partners as well as life partners.
wow.
And so we had been doing our research, we were in different places, different organizations. He was the Fish and Wildlife Service, but in the Migratory Bird Office. We were doing research in Ohio. So Cuyahoga Valley was
Mm,
one of our sites, the Cleveland Metro Park, some other metro parks in the area were our sites for, as well as I said, Maryland and DC, for
hmm.
some of the studies we were doing. And my husband is from Northeast Ohio, and I met him at Ohio
Okay.
State.
Okay.
So we had our daughter, our first daughter, in 1999. We were in DC, and it just became really obvious that all of a sudden, all the congestion, all the crowding, and all the fast
Mm-hmm.
pace of the DC area was just not conducive, not what we wanted in growing our
Mm-hmm.
family and raising our daughter, now daughters. So we wanted to go home and be close to his family. And so
Mm,
luckily, we were both federal employees. I was able to transition federal employee over to a federal national park in Cuyahoga Valley.
right.
It was a lateral, and they had a vacancy in a wildlife biology
Wow.
position. So I was able to
Wow.
do that. My husband got a job with Cleveland Metro Park. So we relocated, and we've never looked back. It was the best decision we ever
Wow.
made. And we've now, our two daughters are fledged from the nest. They are
In bird terms.
yes. And we just loved every minute of our time here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Did you see yourself staying at Cuyahoga Valley for, at this point, 25 years? Did you see yourself becoming superintendent? Like, was
No,
that something you were
no.
hoping towards?
No, no. You know, we made this decision. It was the best decision of our lives, but it was very painful decision. I was coming
Mm,
from, I told you I was an introvert. I
right,
loved the independence and solitude of being a researcher. And I
right.
called my own shots. We worked together, but I mean, we could do whatever we wanted, and we focused on and being out with animals and in wild
Mm.
areas all the time. Now I had to come to work for a national park. And it was just a huge change. It was a huge change
Yeah,
to go from independent researcher working in Latin American countries to come to Ohio and focus on things in the backyard.
yeah.
And yet it was still it was a big transition, it was a tough transition,
Mhm,
but it was really a nice opportunity for me to take what I had learned and apply it very directly to what was happening here in this particular place, and the value of this place
mhm,
to the environment, to the Northeast Ohio, the health and wellness of the environment as well as the people. And so
mhm.
it became a really nice, opportunity to use my skills in a different way.
Yeah, I have two thoughts on this. One is just a kind of funny background on my experience. I am very much so an extrovert, and there's a small period of time where I was studying biomedical engineering and did like a summer research internship and hated it because it was that like independent, like it's quite solitary work. And granted, I wasn't working with animals, but and I had a very wise, like the head of that school at the University of Texas where I went, essentially told me, they were like, if you don't like research and you don't want to go to med school, I don't think biomedical engineering is the best path for you. And I think it's really cool for someone to say that, because I think
Mhm.
there's this, way for people to be like, no, you need to study the profession that I have or whatever. Like might encourage it. And yeah, so it makes me laugh. And it's like cool how there are different opportunities for different people and different, like for you, you loved the research aspect of it. And for me, I was like, get me out. This is not it. So that just made me laugh. And then the other piece is I listened to a different podcast called Wild Ideas Worth Living. And the host, like interviews different adventurers and stuff. And she interviewed this one person who really talks about micro
Mm.
adventuring. And it kind of makes me think of just stuff we've talked about with Cuyahoga Valley. But I think I'm this way. And I think a lot of people are this way of, okay, what's the big adventure? What mountain am I climbing? What, I don't know, surf trip am I going on? Just these crazy, like, once you get in that adventure outdoor space, it's kind of like, what's the next rung on the ladder? And this idea of micro adventuring is just how can you bring that same sense and thrill that you get from adventuring, but to your backyard in a sense? How can you explore the area around you? And I think that's why it's so beautiful that there are parks like Cuyahoga Valley and Indiana Dunes and these parks that are by big metro areas where a lot of people live. And it's like creating more opportunities for people to appreciate and get that sense of adventure and escape into the wilderness without pouring thousands of dollars to go to the Alps or something. I don't know, some crazy big adventure.
I wholeheartedly agree. I've really feel like that, and I've come to believe this even most strongly over the time that I've been here, is these
Mhm.
are the places that are more accessible in the sense of, you don't have to pay all that money. You don't have to, you don't have to travel great distances, and you don't have to be the heartiest, fittest soul, on the earth to be able to
Mhm.
do these huge things, but you still will find adventure. I hadn't heard
Mhm.
micro adventure, but that's what I feel like is really accessible and meaningful in the end, especially. Those are the experience. I
Mm.
feel like the experiences that you can get in a place like this are maybe more long lasting and more they seep into you and stick with you.
Mhm.
Versus I don't know. I mean, all of these adventures are awesome, but I went to the Grand Canyon like millions of people do every year, and I have to say, I've seen in movies it's kind of a joke, but I had the same sense is that you go and stand on the rim of the Grand Canyon and you kind of look around, you say, this is phenomenal. This is amazing. Yeah. Okay. On to the next thing because it's almost too
Mhm.
much to take. It's almost too much to say. It
Mhm.
doesn't even feel real. I think people who go
Mhm.
down into the canyon probably have an even better experience. But this is where you can
Mhm.
immerse yourself in this and you can look at that micro level. You can sit in the woods or right by the river and just kind of be and experience things that are coming past you. And it's quieter
Yeah.
and you might see more. You might see more animals. You might see more activity of nature
Mhm.
and you can be a spectator of things that people don't normally get to see.
Yeah. Yeah, you can notice. I mean, I love wildflowers, so I'm like, any like maybe the way that you love, maybe not. I did not get a PhD in flowers or plants, but I love. So I was going to say maybe the same way you love animals, but that's not true because I did not pursue that level of education. But that's kind of for me the thing that always sticks out is in a place that I'm like adventuring in or experiencing is the wildflowers.
Yeah, and I think little kids, they come here. We have a bunch of wildflowers and around our visitor center, say. And I see so many people come by and they do close-up photos with their phone of pretty
Mhm.
common wildflowers, and but it's just they're so beautiful and people are noticing at that level and they're taking photos of these things. Or the little pollinator bee or the tiny little butterfly that's there, the kids are like amazed and getting all excited and pointing and it's just does I guess what it is yeah, focusing down to the little things and
Mhm.
it's more conducive here maybe because they're right in front of you and it's a little slower pace and
Yeah.
I like it.
I got a camera, I think when I turned like 12 or something. And I remember we went to Hawaii and I think I only took photos of flowers. And it's similar of like, and I realized that the other day I was on a walk and I like took out my phone and took a picture of a flower. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't changed at all. I'm just zooming in on these little flowers. So
That's
it made me
fantastic. I
laugh.
love to hear that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. What's your favorite experience you've had as a quote unquote visitor in Cuyahoga Valley?
Yeah, I think that to tell you the truth, the thing that sticks in my mind is because I haven't been a visitor very
I
much.
guess
I'm
true.
mostly
Yeah.
somebody doing work in the park, and I might be sitting around and seeing cool stuff. But I was a visitor to the park before I even knew the park existed. I knew,
Mm.
I met my husband in college, and I came home to his family home one weekend or something, and it was in the winter, and his brother and he were both big birders already.
Mhm.
That from childhood they had been bird identifiers, birders.
Mhm.
And so we decided we were going to go on a birding trip and they decided the place they wanted to go, which was the wildest place, was this exotic place called the Cuyahoga Valley. And I
Oh,
remember
cool.
that from so I was, in my early 20s and I wasn't from Ohio, even though I was at Ohio State. I wasn't from Ohio. And so, this was all new to me in this exotic place called Cuyahoga Valley. And I remember we have here a nice mix of the evergreen trees, the hemlocks, and there are some, pines and spruces and stuff.
Hmm.
And I remember that we went through an area where there was a lot of it. It was snow covered. It was so quiet. It was just really, it did seem like we were far away from cities. And so that always stuck with
That's
me.
cool. Yeah, that's cool. What do you find? We've talked about this a little bit, but diving in more specifically, what do you think are some challenges that are unique to Cuyahoga Valley?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some respects, I started off talking about the erosion to the from the river in conflict
Yeah.
with the railroad, and
Hmm.
that is kind of our biggest challenge is balancing because we are along this river that gives us our name and is the most important feature of this park. We want to protect and preserve that river to be a river and to
Right.
be free to be a river and to move like it's supposed to.
Right.
But gall darn it, we have we have our most important historic resources right next to the river. And we have
Oh.
a narrow valley with steep sides, and all of the
Mm,
residential area is built up on those ridge tops. And so all the
mm,
water comes down into the river. We have more flooding. We have these cultural resources that are right alongside the river that are not only historic, but are our primary recreational facilities. So always the challenge is it's not necessarily unique across all national parks, but for this place, because of the narrowness and the proximity of our feature of the main features of this park,
mhm.
it's a continual balancing act and to try and help both the historic resources and the river is very tough, very tough.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
as climate change is happening, there's more flooding. There's more frequent flooding.
Yeah.
There's more storm water coming off those hillsides. And so our challenge is, and we are trying to rise to that challenge, is how do we plan for the future so that we do protect the river and we get out of our own way, and get out of the way
Mm,
of the river in the sense of being ready for, resilient to the changes that are
right.
happening now and will continue.
Right. I don't envy the pretty much every superintendent I talk to that's just the challenges that you're having to face is it's pretty intense. And so I I don't envy the push and pull of all the different things you're having to manage. Another question kind of looking forward is are there any initiatives we've talked about the initiatives with the Cuyahoga River, but are there any other new initiatives or projects on the horizon that you're particularly excited about?
Still around the river, we recently purchased a large tract of land that was a former golf course,
Interesting.
which was
Okay.
in the center of the park. It was kind of a challenge even acquiring it, but we have acquired it now along with the help of our friends group, Conservancy for Cuyahoga
Mm.
Valley National Park. And we have remediated it from mercury that had been applied in the fungicides for the maintenance of tees and greens. And we're
What?
just
Is
finishing
that
that up.
common?
Yeah, for older golf course, I'm sorry to say it is
Whoa.
fairly common. So
I feel
this
like
is pretty old.
mercury is such a like I don't know much about those things, but mercury is the one where you're like, "Oh, that one's a bad
It's a
one.
bad one.
Beware."
It's a bad one.
Yeah.
But this is such an old golf course that actually they were applying it within, they didn't know that it was not appropriate until much later
Mm.
after they'd been applying
Yeah.
it quite a lot. So I do think this is a fairly common issue for golf course
Interesting.
properties. They're also, though, very good properties for development. So this was
Mm.
definitely a threat of large scale development right inside
Mhm.
the main area of the national park. So
Right.
we had a lot of public support for our acquisition of this property.
Mm.
So that's been very exciting that we were able to acquire it. But more exciting is it is absolutely a stellar, beautiful property,
Mm.
mostly along the river, and it has a large amount of riverfront property. So it gives us such a huge opportunity to bring a new type of experience. We've talked about experience of paddling the river. We're
Right.
also trying to improve ways for people to just be near the river, to to see it, to picnic by it, to have less active involvement in the river, but or to fish, things like that. This is a big area where we will be able to have much more of a slower paced, linger, passive, gathering area where people have
Mm,
access to the river for many reasons. There will be a river access point, but just to picnic or to gather or to play. There will be some nature
yeah.
play areas, things like that.
Cool.
So it's really going to be much more community friendly, family friendly. It's going to
Mm,
offer a really nice experience that we really don't have a lot of. Unfortunately, we recognized there was a gap in what kinds of experiences we were offering the public near the river. So this is going to
mm,
really transform the experience. Not to mention that we've been interested for a long time in connecting again to our inner cities, and we have a large African American population in Northeast Ohio, in the cities especially. And we don't have a high visitation of people of color. And
mm,
because mostly it's been from the suburbs right around us, which are predominantly white. And so, one interesting thing was we've dived into the history of this area, of this particular property. And it is so rich in history of African American recreation in the valley
mm.
historically in the 20s up through, 60s and 70s. It was a place where African Americans from the region were coming to jazz clubs and entertainment clubs and campsites, all of which are gone now, but we know where they were, and we're going to kind of bring that history alive again for the
Wow,
region.
that's awesome.
And so that's been cool. Not to mention, we were talking about Native American history. The area is rich for Native American history, which gives us the opportunity to really highlight that a lot more than we have so far in a lot of our
Hmm.
park. So just tremendous opportunities for telling more stories, engaging new audiences, and providing experiences that we haven't yet.
Mm. I think I was talking to David Smith, who's currently the Golden Gate National Recreation Area superintendent, but he was at Joshua Tree before that, and he has a TED talk. This was one of my first interviews, so I'm testing my memory here. But he has a TED talk on engaging local communities in national parks and national recreation areas. And it was interesting because it was a lot of the parks were designed on this like nuclear family
Mhm,
model
mhm,
where there's like a single picnic table
mhm,
for a family of 4 or whatever, and it's
mhm,
just this effort in the Park Service to expand the type of recreation opportunities and, like, more communal opportunities and ways and putting this emphasis on, I think, what you've talked about specifically with Cuyahoga Valley of, yes, it's so awesome to have people like, it was so awesome that my family got to go to the Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks and experience it, but I think it's even more special when people who live nearby are have going to the park as a part of their life.
mhm.
And so I think it's really exciting that you're working on ways and designing hopefully things for local communities in Cleveland and like you said, like connecting even to downtown, or I guess I don't know
Yeah,
what the
downtown
term is,
Cleveland, downtown Akron,
downtown
yes.
Cleveland. Yeah. And having more diversity in who's coming to the park and enjoying it.
And we're very proud that through this process of planning, we have actually done very deep engagement with
Mm,
communities, with African American communities, communities of color, refugee communities that are in the
mm,
area, other people, in addition to current users and all of our community members, to really look at what is missing from these experiences. And it's what you just said. It's some of the sort of, just general community gathering and less fast paced, less active recreation.
mhm.
So and this really came from them, the focus groups and the people who we engaged with, music and just being with people they love is really all that matters. And it doesn't
Yeah.
matter all the whiz bang amenities that you provide necessarily. So I really found
Yeah.
that heartwarming as well as informative. So
Yeah, that's cool. As we're wrapping up on our time, a way I like to finish conversations is by asking, what is something you wish everyone knew about Cuyahoga Valley National Park, regardless of if they have or haven't been? I know we've talked about it a lot, so it might be hard to come up with something specific.
I think it is a little hard to come up with it. I think what I hear from people, though, when they come here and they don't know what to expect, that they are so surprised by how they do feel they get away from how it is
Mm,
quiet, a slower pace. And I think that people are they're just so surprised by the beauty of it.
mm,
Truly, the beauty of the river, of the landscape, the little things, I think, is what
yeah.
surprises them, and the sense of awe that they still get from a place that just seems ordinary, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think
Yeah.
that's what come see for yourself. It
Yeah.
don't let the name Cleveland, Ohio, or Ohio itself make you think any one thing. You know, come see for yourself because I think you'll be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, that's a hope that keeps coming up with this podcast is I want to highlight the stories of the Grand Canyons and the Grand Teton, these
Yeah.
majestic, crazy landscapes, but then also highlighting the beauty in every like every park was set aside for a reason.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it's cool to get to hear your perspective on that. And yeah, your love for the park is really evident. And I think that comes just from your character. And then also the fact that you have gotten to work there for the past 24 years, almost 25. So yeah, thank you for your time. It's been really, really fun to learn a little bit more about Cuyahoga Valley and about your perspective on it.
Thank you, Maddie. It's been a pleasure. A lot of fun for me too. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening today. Who Runs This Park is presented by Expert Voice. Gear up for adventure with Expert Voice, the outdoor gear source for industry experts. Our music was composed by Danielle Bees, and if you like this podcast, don't forget to rate it, review it, download it, and tell your friends about it. Listen to our other episodes wherever you listen to your podcast, or visit us at Linktree/Who Runs This Park. That's linktr.ee/Who Runs This Park. I'm Maddie Pellman, and you've been listening to Who Runs This Park.